Welcome everybody, welcome to this May edition of the Practice Management series. What I thought I was going to do tonight is just introduce some of the tools we use in working with our platinum groups in vet dynamics, getting practices to perform better. One of the key issues that comes up all the time is obviously getting a team of people working together, being productive and really getting high performance from them. So originally it was called speaking the same language, but I've sort of transmuted across to communicating with the practice team. Whatever level people are in the team, there seems to be a constant dichotomy of management and leadership. If you own the practice, obviously there's a management leadership dichotomy, but even head nurses, head receptionists, any number of people working. And there's an interesting separation of those two skills or skill sets that we see that need to be managed within a very close-knit group of people trying to work together and trying to do a high-performance job. So it's worthwhile just sort of defining the differences here. We see management as really the efficiency factor of doing things right, controlling, organizing, planning, budgeting, as I would call them the cops of the neural world. They manage everything, keep it efficient, and make sure it works. Leadership, on the other hand, is much more about working with people, ideas, setting directions with a vision, inspiring and aligning people to do a good job, and maintaining momentum, inspiration that way, the Vim side of it. So that's sort of one context. Many of you have probably heard that before, but it sits into a sort of broader context that we use as a model and also a tool in trying to get people working together in that model. So the management side of things, we look at really two main roles. One is setting the aims and goals and objectives of the practice, be they clinical goals, the financial goals, things we need to achieve and get done. And that's an analytical job of actually defining those. And then trying to put the processes and resources behind that to make sure things happen. And I think all of us are pretty familiar with that if we work in any sort of practice that we see it happening with the people we work with, or we're responsible for doing that. There is a piece of leadership that I feel generally is less well serviced in the veterinary world. We're not naturally leaders necessarily, and leadership is a more holistic thing, but the purpose of leadership is two things. It's probably the communication and relationship build and maintenance of the team of people working together. Do it on our own, we can work individually, but of course what we're looking for is that synergy and putting that in the context of a vision and strategy of taking the whole business forward, combining the individual vision and strategy of the people, but having a meta strategy overall. So in that, often, and if that was easy, we'd all be doing it, but obviously it's not easy, and there's probably a good reason it's not easy, because those four skill sets, those ways of working, have very different capabilities, but they also have different languages at work, and people will work in different ways. Equally, we can probably see ourselves fitting into an area of that we're more comfortable with. Now, in a veterinary practice, we see that people have vet meetings and nurse meetings and receptionist meetings. We find, honestly, that they're pretty inefficient and ineffective in actually driving a team culture and driving a team performance together. What we see is in a business is there's 5 key functions, or 6 key functions. There's the ownership, there's the clinical function, obviously the important one of making animals better, but beyond that there's a financial, analytical, measurement function, and then a marketing function, interacting with clients, attracting and converting those to be good clients. And of course there's a personnel and training issue around keeping people trained up and working well. And of course what we see missing often is that piece in the middle, that management team structure of bringing those 4 diverse groups together and making good decisions. So the management team piece there is what I'd call the decision-making executive. So the owners have an input, but equally marketing, financial, clinical, CPD, and the training all have a piece in it. Now, if that's going to work and work effectively, one, it needs to meet regularly, but it also needs to have a common language or a common understanding of the points of view that people bring to bear at that. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we have, is one, getting these teams together in the first place, but then creating an internal coherence that actually makes them work. When it does, it works fantastically well and we get a really powerful result from it. But it can be a long way forward. So we introduce a few tools to make that happen. So what I want to sort of talk a little bit is about how we sort of look at personal thinking and communication and decision-making profiles, how people do that. And you just got to look at the people you work with and you can see that they're all completely different. The vets can be different, the nurses, the receptionists, the admin team, all sort of doing a different job in a different way, and you can probably appreciate not always communication is a smooth and thing in the team. So let's see how we can do that. If you look at those quadrants, this is a model we sort of work with. It's kind of simple. There is some science behind it, but we try and keep it in a way that is easily understandable to work with. All of us have a full range of communication abilities across the board, but in one quadrant there's a sort of an analytical, reasonable, rational, logical, that need for detail and the need for focus, etc. So that's sort of what we're calling our top left quadrant. Below that, as we've seen on the leadership model, was the dependable, reliable, organizational planning piece. And this is the safety and security of the proven way of doing it and keeping things organized. And all of us use those skill sets when we're planning a holiday or planning anything at all. The other side of it is sometimes when we're maybe not at work, or other times we can be more curious and playful, sort of challenging the future a little bit, seeing well out, and often this is planning the good things in life and way forward as well. And underlying that is usually involving other people. So there's a more caring or sensitive, a perceptive and intuitive way of working with people. And there's no doubt even the most hardened vet, businessman or whatever, has all those skill sets within them. But a couple of things moderate that. One is our history, how we went to school, what we learnt at school, what our genetics are, what our parents were, will certainly have an influence in the preferences we occur to that. The context we find ourselves in our work situation, so what job we end up in. Of course, as vets, if we've chosen the veterinary path or nursing, we've chosen a scientific endeavour of investigation and process on that. If you've chosen reception or client care, well, perhaps you're veering onto some of the other skill sets. So the context will vary with that. And of course, then our relationships, the people we mix with, people we marry, the people we mix with at work, can either aid or they can subsidize or they can complement us, and we can find ways of working together on that. So I said a little bit of science. I won't go into this too much, but it is based on sort of a little bit of brain structure, and this isn't purely correct. If you know any neurophysiology, you could argue this, but basically it's 4 levels of capability. If we take the top and bottom, so at the bottom here we have a limbic structure. This is our reptilian brain, the very ancient brain that sort of evolutionary has developed. It's basically responsible for fight, flight, or freeze mechanisms. It's our ability to instinctively work on that level. So it is geared around safety, but it's also geared around the other F of breeding and getting things moving forward genetically that way. So it is about getting together in culture. Above that is, of course, the mammalian neocortex of the cerebral brain, which gives us our ability to think, to plan, to look at the future, to imagine, visual cortex, etc. It's all built into that. And so there's sort of this upper cerebral thinking and this lower limbic thinking. Left to right, then we actually have the corpus callosum joining these two sides together. But of course, on the left side is much more our structured thinking, more of the analytical processing thinking. On the right, we have the visual cortex, we have imagination sits, memory is sitting over there as well. So a lot of the right brain is much more an unstructured way of thinking. So top to bottom, cerebral to limbic, left to right, structured to unstructured. It's kind of the basic model. So the tool we use sort of puts that together as a model function, but what we do know, you need all 4 functions. You can't have half a brain. We could argue that for some people, I'm sure. You've got to function together situationally, making up the whole brain, but 1 or 2 of those areas become more dominant in the way we work and the way we naturally together. So we've ended up with this HBDI model, and that stands for Herman Brain Dominance Indicator. It's developed